42 weeks was not a number that appeared in any of the books he'd read. It wasn't circled in red on pregnancy charts or whispered about in forums late at night. 42 weeks existed only in his head now, stacked there like stones, each one heavier than the last. He marked the days on the kitchen calendar with a black pen. The ink bled slightly into the paper, as if even the page was tired of holding the truth. Every morning, he stood barefoot on the cold tile, coffee untouched, staring at the square that read today. No arrows, no notes, no contractions scribbled in excitement. Just another empty box. The nursery was finished. That was the cruelest part. He had painted the walls himself, soft gray, neutral, safe. The crib stood assembled beneath the window, its tiny mattress wrapped in plastic, untouched. A stuffed giraffe sat propped in the corner chair, its stitched smile frozen in permanent patience. Sometimes, when the house felt too quiet, he swore the room smelled faintly of baby powder, though he knew it was just his mind filling in gaps that reality refused to close. He told himself pregnancies were unpredictable. Everyone said that. Bodies had their own timelines. Stress delayed things. Doctors were cautious. Women knew their bodies better than anyone. He repeated these truths like prayers whenever doubt crept too close. She had been calm about it, almost serene. Babies come when they're ready, she'd said weeks ago, her hand resting lightly on her belly, her voice steady enough to quiet him. When he suggested calling the doctor again, she smiled, small, tired, and told him not to worry. Worry, she said, wasn't good for the baby. So he stopped worrying, or tried to. Instead, he prepared. He washed the onesies again, folding them with meticulous care. He practiced installing the car seat 3 times, and a 4th, just to be sure. At night, he lay awake listening for sounds that never came. No cries, no sudden pain, no rush to the hospital under streetlights and adrenaline. Friends texted less now. Their excitement had dulled into polite check-ins. Any news? They asked, and he always answered the same way. Not yet. Soon. Soon had stretched thin. On the 42nd week, he noticed something he couldn't explain away so easily. Standing behind her in the hallway mirror, he realized her body looked unchanged. Not smaller, not heavier, just the same as it had been yesterday. And the day before that. The thought lodged itself in his chest, sharp and unwelcome. That night, as she slept beside him, breathing slow and even, he stared at the ceiling and wondered, for the first time, whether waiting was no longer an act of love, but of avoidance. Whether asking questions might be the only way forward. In the morning, he would bring up the next appointment again. In the morning, he would finally listen to the silence. Morning arrived without ceremony. No rush. No urgency, just light slipping through the blinds and the sound of her moving quietly in the kitchen, as if any sudden motion might shatter something fragile between them. He waited until after breakfast to ask, "Did the clinic ever call back?" He said, keeping his tone careful, neutral, practiced. "About the ultrasound?" She didn't look at him right away. She rinsed her mug, sat upside down on the towel, and shrugged. "They're backed up. You know how it is." He nodded, though he didn't know. The last ultrasound had been months ago. He remembered the grainy image taped to the refrigerator, the way he'd traced the curve of the spine with his finger, amazed that something so abstract could feel so real. Since then, every appointment had been postponed, rescheduled, or somehow handled without him. "It might help," he said gently, "just to check, for peace of mind." She sighed, finally turning to him. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with something that looked like hurt. "Why don't you trust me?" The question landed exactly where she intended it to. "I do," he said quickly. "Of course I do." "Then stop pushing," she replied, softer now. "Stress isn't good for the baby." There was again the baby, always present, never seen. He backed off, ashamed of the relief he felt when the conversation ended. It was easier to let the silence stretch than to press into territory that made him feel like an intruder. Loving her meant believing her. He reminded himself of that as he watched her pull on a sweater, her movements measured, controlled. Later that afternoon, while he was at work, his phone buzzed. It wasn't her. "This is her mother," the the woman said when he answered, voice warm and composed, the kind of tone that suggested authority without effort. She mentioned you've been anxious. He stiffened. I just thought another ultrasound might. She's fine, the mother interrupted, not unkindly. Some women don't show the way you expect. And hospitals can be dramatic. They make everything a problem. He didn't respond right away. You're doing a good job, she continued, being supportive. That's what she needs right now, not interrogation. The word stung. When the call ended, he sat in his car longer than necessary, staring at the dashboard. The concern he'd felt moments earlier now felt misplaced, almost embarrassing. Two women, mother and daughter, had told him the same thing. Who was he to doubt them? That night, he noticed how carefully she avoided standing too close, how she turned slightly away when he reached for her belly. When he asked if the baby was moving, she smiled and said, all the time, but didn't invite his hand. Later, alone in the shower, he replayed the day in his head, the missed ultrasound, the phone call, the way answers slid past questions without ever touching them. It was like listening to sound through a wall, muffled, incomplete. Still, when she curled into him in bed, he wrapped an arm around her without hesitation. Doubt felt like betrayal, and he wasn't ready to betray the future he'd already built in his mind. A few days later, she mentioned the baby's shower. My mom thinks it'll help, she said casually. Make everything feel real again. He forced a smile and agreed, ignoring the quiet thought that rose up uninvited, that maybe reality was exactly what everyone was trying to avoid. The house filled with noise before it filled with truth. By noon, pink balloons bobbed against the ceiling, their strings brushing shoulders as guests moved to the living room. Blue napkins were stacked neatly beside trays of food, a careful balance meant to signal openness. We didn't want to know the gender. Her mother explained brightly to anyone who asked. Neutral, thoughtful, normal. He stood near the doorway at first, watching performance assemble itself. Her mother commanded the room with ease, directing people where to sit, when to eat, when to laugh. She spoke for her daughter often, anticipating questions before they were asked. She's exhausted, she said. Doctors say everything's fine. Each statement landed like a period, ending conversations before they could wander. His partner sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, smiling when prompted. She wore a loose dress, fabric draping where he thought there should be more weight, more presence. When friends leaned in to hug her, he noticed how quickly she stiffened, how carefully she controlled the contact. Any day now, someone said, passing her a wrapped gift. Any day, she echoed, eyes flicking briefly toward her mother. He helped open presents, holding up tiny socks and bottles while the room cooed on cue. He laughed when expected, thanked people when appropriate. But he couldn't stop noticing what wasn't there. No stories about cravings, no shared complaint about labor, no casual comparisons to other pregnancies. The conversation skimmed the surface and moved on. At one point, a friend crouched near the coffee table, tilting her head. You haven't dropped yet, she said lightly. My sister did weeks before. The room went quiet for half a second too long. Her mother laughed. Every pregnancy is different, she said smoothly. People worry too much these days. The friend nodded, embarrassed, and the moment dissolved. But something had shifted. He felt it like a draft in a clothes room. Later, as cake was cut and photos snapped, he stood behind the camera while her mother insisted on one more picture. Put your hand on her belly, she instructed him, adjusting the angle. That's a shot everyone loves. His palm rested where it always had, warm fabric beneath his fingers. She smiled for the camera, but her eyes didn't meet his. They drifted somewhere past him, unfocused, as if she were already bracing for something. When the guests finally left, the house fell into a heavy silence. Deflated balloons sagged against the walls, and discarded wrapping paper littered the floor like evidence after a celebration no one could quite explain. She disappeared into the bedroom. Without a word, he stayed behind, collecting plates, stacking cups, replaying the day in fragments. The forced cheer, the interruptions, the way every answer felt rehearsed. He picked up one of the cards from the gift table and reread a message written in looping script. Can't wait to meet them. That night, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. Her makeup was gone, her shoulders slumped, the performance finally over. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." He wanted to ask more, about the comment from the friend, about the way her mother never left her side, about why the shower had felt less like a celebration and more like a defense. But exhaustion, hers and his, won. As he turned off the light, he noticed her mother's coat still hanging by the door, as if she might return at any moment. The thought unsettled him, because for the first time, it felt like the pregnancy wasn't something they were sharing at all, but something carefully managed, supervised, and protected from him. Her mother didn't leave the next morning. She was already in the kitchen when he woke up, moving with the confidence of someone who had always belonged there. Coffee brewed, dishes from the night before were gone. The house felt rearranged, not physically, but hierarchically. "Sleep okay?" the mother asked, smiling as she set a mug in front of him. She didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "She's still exhausted. I told her she needs to rest more. This late in pregnancy, everything matters." He glanced down the hallway, toward the bedroom. The door was closed. "I didn't know you were staying," he said. "She needs me," the mother replied simply. "You understand." It wasn't a question. From that day on, communication shifted. Questions he used to ask his partner were now answered by her mother instead. Appointments were handled. Symptoms were normal. Concerns were counterproductive. Each response carried the same underlying message: trust us or risk becoming the problem. When he tried to bring things up privately, his partner shrank inward. Her voice lowered. Her eyes darted toward doorways, listening. "Please," she whispered once, gripping his sleeve. "Don't start anything." "Start what?" he wanted to ask. A conversation? The truth? But the fear in her face stopped him. He began noticing how often her mother corrected her. Small things at first. What she should eat. How she should sit. When she should lie down. The daughter complied instantly, like a reflex drilled deep over years. There was no argument, not even irritation. Just obedience. One afternoon, he overheard them in the bedroom. "You're being dramatic," the mother said sharply. "You don't need to tell him everything." "I just thought," the daughter began. "You thought wrong," her mother snapped. "Do you want to ruin this?" Silence followed. Then the soft sound of crying. Quickly muffled. He stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. When the door opened, both women smiled at him as if nothing had happened. That night, the mother sat across from him at the table, folding her hands neatly. "She's fragile," she said. "Emotionally. Always has been. You have to be careful not to push her." "I'm not trying to push," he replied. "I just want to understand what's going on." "And that's exactly the problem," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You don't need to understand everything. You need to support her." Support, he was learning, meant silence. Days blurred together. The mother stayed longer, took over grocery shopping, answered calls meant for her daughter, even spoke to friends on her behalf, explaining cancellations with practiced concern. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he was edged out of decisions that should have involved him. One evening, while folding laundry, he noticed something odd. A stack of maternity clothes, neatly arranged, barely worn. No stretching, no fading, no signs of weeks of use. He picked up a dress from the baby shower. The fabric still held its store-pressed creases. When he asked his partner about it, she froze. Before she could speak, her mother appeared in the doorway. "We're saving some things for after," she said briskly. "Don't overthink it." Overthinking. Another word that shut doors. That night, he lay awake listening to the house settle around him. The quiet no longer felt peaceful. It felt monitored, controlled, as if the truth itself were being held at bay by sheer force of will. He stared into the darkness and realized something that unsettled him more than any misappointment or delayed ultrasound ever had. Whatever was happening wasn't just between him and his partner anymore. There was a system at work, and at the center of it stood her mother, deciding what was said, what was hidden, and how long the lie could be made to last. Once the thought took root, it refused to stay quiet. He noticed in fragments at first, in reflections, in passing moments. He tried not to linger on. The way her silhouette looked the same in the hallway mirror week after week. The way her weight never seemed to shift when she lowered herself onto the couch. The way her clothes hung, not stretched or strained, but untouched. 42 weeks had come and gone. 43 arrived without ceremony. Her mother explained everything before he could ask. Some women carry differently, she said, slicing fruit at the counter, especially with stress, especially with her history. Her history, always vague, always useful, but his eyes had begun to betray him. They tracked details now, uninvited and unforgiving. When she showered, steam curling beneath the bathroom door, there was no change in the curve of her body when she emerged. When she slept, there was no shifting, no protective cradle of a belly that demanded space. One evening, while her mother was out, he finally spoke. "Can we talk?" he asked softly, sitting beside her on the bed. She tensed immediately. "About what?" "About everything," he said. "About the baby." Her breath caught. She stared at the wall, jaw tightening. "You don't believe me," she whispered. "That's not what I said." "It's what you mean." He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "I just need honesty," he said. "Something feels wrong. And pretending it doesn't, it's tearing me apart." For a moment, he thought she might tell him. Her shoulders shook. Tears welled and spilled over, silent and fast. She opened her mouth, closed it again, as if the words were too heavy to carry alone. "I can't," she said finally. "You don't understand." "Help me understand," he pleaded. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Her mother appeared in the doorway like she'd been summoned, eyes sharp, taking in the scene in a single glance. "What's going on?" she asked. "Nothing," her daughter said too quickly, wiping her face. "He's upsetting you," the mother said, already stepping forward. She placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, firm, grounding. "I told you this would happen." "I'm not trying to upset her," he said, standing. "I just want the truth." "The truth," her mother repeated coolly, "is that she's under enormous pressure, and you're adding to it." He felt something inside him snap, not loudly, but cleanly. "I'm not the enemy," he said. "I'm the one who's been waiting. I built the nursery. I stood through the shower. I believed every word." "And belief," her mother said, "means trust, not interrogation." She guided her daughter toward the bed, tucking her in like a child. The gesture felt wrong, intimate in a way that excluded him completely. "Go get some air," the mother said without looking at him. "You're not helping right now." He didn't argue. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, the night air sharp against his face. He stood on the porch longer than necessary, staring at the dark street, replaying the moment her daughter almost spoke. Almost. When he came back inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Her mother's door was closed. His partner lay still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "I'm sorry," she whispered when he lay down beside her. "I tried." "Tried what?" he wanted to ask. Instead, he listened to her breathing and wondered how a body could carry a lie for so long without changing at all. And somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, a darker question began to form. Not whether the baby would come, but whether there had ever been one to begin with. She had learned to lie long before she learned why. As a child, silence had been safer than truth. Silence avoided lectures that stretched for hours, avoided the sharp disappointment that settled into her mother's face like a permanent bruise. Silence kept the peace. Lies, small at first, kept it protected. She learned which truths were allowed, which ones caused damage. By the time she met him, lying no longer felt like deception. It felt like survival. At first, the pregnancy story had been a moment of panic, blurted out during an argument she hadn't known how to end. She remembered the way his anger had softened instantly, how concern had replaced frustration, how the future suddenly felt anchored again. Her mother had been quiet when she told her, too quiet. Then came the plan. "We'll figure out," her mother had said calmly, as if discussing groceries. You just need time. Time became weeks. Weeks became evidence. Fake appointment cards. Excuses rehearsed until they sounded natural. Her mother handled the details, the logistics, the confidence. All she had to do was follow instructions and not break. But bodies betrayed you eventually. Hers just hadn't yet. Lying about the baby was only the surface. What she was really hiding was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of disappointing the one person whose approval she had chased her entire life. Fear of what would happen if the truth finally escaped. Every time he touched her stomach, guilt surged so violently it made her dizzy. She wanted to pull his hand away, wanted to scream that there was nothing there, that he was mourning something that never existed. Instead, she smiled. Smiling was easier than shattering him. Her mother reminded her constantly what was at stake. He'll leave if you tell him, she said. Men always do. When doubt crept in, her mother reframed it as weakness. When guilt overwhelmed her, it was labeled selfishness. The lie grew not because she wanted it to, but because stopping felt impossible. At night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, memorizing the weight of his arm around her. She told herself she'd tell him tomorrow, or after one more week, or after she figured out how to fix it. There was always another delay, another reason, but now the cracks were widening. She saw in his eyes, the careful watching, the way his questions came wrapped in restraint. She heard it in the pauses before he spoke. He was no longer just waiting. He was noticing, and her mother noticed that, too. We can't let this spiral, her mother said one afternoon, voice low and urgent. You're getting sloppy. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. He knows something's wrong. Her mother's gaze hardened. Then we accelerate. Accelerate what? An ending, her mother said. One way or another. The words terrified her, but she didn't ask for clarification. Asking questions had never helped. That evening, she felt a sudden tightness in her chest. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred at the edges. Panic, sharp and unfamiliar, clawed its way up her throat. I don't feel right, she told him, barely audible. He was on his feet instantly. What do you mean? I feel dizzy, she said, and I can't breathe. Her mother appeared almost immediately, already reaching for her coat. That's it, she said. We're going to the hospital. The word landed like a verdict. As he helped her into the car, her heart hammered, not from fear of illness, but from the unbearable certainty that whatever waited on the other side of those doors would not be something they could lie their way out of. She closed her eyes as the engine started, knowing the body she had used to protect the truth was finally turning against her. And once it did, everything would come apart. The hospital lights were too bright, too honest. They buzzed softly overhead as nurses moved with practiced efficiency, asking questions that required dates, numbers, details. He answered what he could. 43 weeks. Dizziness. Shortness of breath. Possible labor complications. Each word sounded more fragile once spoken aloud. Her mother stayed close, a hand always on her daughter's arm, answering before anyone else could. She's anxious, she said. High-risk pregnancy. Very sensitive. The nurse nodded, typing, then glanced at the chart. When was her last prenatal visit? There it was. The pause. The first hairline crack. Her mother smiled. She's transferred care recently. It's all in the system. We'll verify, the nurse said, still polite but firmer now. They separated them then. Routine, they said. Blood pressure. Urine sample. Ultrasound. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. He saw a panic flash across her face. I don't want an ultrasound, she said weakly. They said I didn't need one. The nurse hesitated, then looked to the doctor who had just entered the room. He was young, unreadable. At 43 weeks, he said carefully, we do. Her mother stepped forward. This is unnecessary. You're upsetting her. The doctor met her gaze. Then we'll do it quickly. They rolled the machine in. He stood frozen at the foot of the bed, watching as Joe was applied. As the screen flickered to life, he waited for something, anything, to appear. A shape, a movement. proof that the waiting, the silence, the doubt had all been worth it. The screen stayed empty. The technician adjusted the probe, her brow furrowing slightly. She tried again, and again, the room filled with a different kind of silence. Thick, suffocating, impossible to explain away. "I'm going to get another doctor," the technician said finally. "No," her mother snapped. "This is ridiculous." But it was already too late. A second doctor entered, then a third. Voices lowered, curtains drawn. Someone asked her mother to step back. She refused. Security was mentioned, quietly but clearly, and then the words arrived, clinical and devastating. "There is no fetus." Time fractured. He felt it first in his body. A rush of heat, a ringing in his ears, the floor tilting beneath him. He grabbed the rail of the bed to stay upright. Across from him, her mother laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's impossible," she said. "You're incompetent." Her daughter made a sound then. Not a word, not a cry, but something broken tearing its way out of her chest. She folded in on herself, sobbing, shaking, hands clawing the blanket as if it could hide her. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry." He stared at her, waiting for the sentence to finish, for a clarification, for someone to wake him up. But nothing came. Doctors asked questions. When had the pregnancy been confirmed? Who had been providing care? Where were the records? Each question peeled another layer off the lie until there was nothing left to hold it together. Her mother tried to take control, raise her voice, accuse him of cruelty, threaten lawsuits. But authority drained out of her words as reality closed in. A social worker arrived, then hospital administration. Someone gently guided him into the hallway. "I don't understand," he said to no one in particular. There was a shower. "We bought things." She felt real. The social worker's face softened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know." Through the glass, he watched as her mother argued with staff, her composure finally cracking. He watched as his partner sat hunched on the bed, arms wrapped around herself, a small, shaking figure beneath the weight of everything she had carried alone. The baby he had waited for, mourned already, had never existed, and yet the loss felt real, crushing, absolute. Later, much later, a police officer introduced himself quietly. "We just need to ask a few questions," he said. There appeared to be elements of fraud involved. Fraud. The word echoed. As the officer spoke, he realized this night wasn't an ending. It was an opening into interviews, statements, records, and a version of the truth far more complicated than he was prepared to face. Behind him, the doors of maternity wards slid shut with a soft mechanical click, and with them closed the last chapter of the story he thought he was living, making room for an investigation that would decide who had been deceived, who had orchestrated it, and how far the damage truly went. By morning, the story no longer belonged to them. The hospital room had been emptied of celebration before it had ever held any. No bassinet, no balloons, just paperwork, muted voices, and the steady rhythm of procedures taking over where emotion could not. What had happened was being reorganized into facts, and facts had consequences. They interviewed him first. A small windowless room, a plastic chair, a detective with a calm voice, and a legal pad resting on his knee. The questions came carefully, not accusatory, but relentless in their scope. When had he first been told about the pregnancy? Had he attended any medical appointments? Had he given money for care, supplies, or support? "Yes," he said again and again. He listed dates, receipts, messages, moments he'd once treasured now flattened into evidence. The detective nodded slowly. "We're not treating you as a suspect," he said. "At this point, you appear to be a victim." The word sat wrong in his chest. Victims were supposed to bleed, to have visible wounds. All he had was an empty nursery and 43 weeks of erased time. In another room, they questioned her. She told the truth this time, halting and fragmented. She admitted there had never been a positive test, never been a doctor, never been a baby. She explained the fake appointments, the rehearsed answers, the way her mother had handled everything that required confidence. She said she'd take care of it, she whispered, staring at her hands. She said, I just had to hold on. And in a third room, they spoke to her mother. The tone shifted there. Defensive, combative. She denied intent, denied responsibility, reframed the entire ordeal as concern for her daughter's mental health. She's fragile, she insisted. I was protecting her. From what? Someone asked. She didn't answer. Over the next days, the scope widened. Investigators pulled phone records, discovered falsified emails from clinics that didn't exist, appointment cards printed at home, a pregnancy test purchased months earlier, negative, discarded, replaced with the story that followed. They found evidence of planning, not a moment of panic, but a sustained deception. Fraud, they called it, emotional and financial, identity misrepresentation, abuse of trust, no blood, no bruises, but damage all the same. The press didn't wait long. Man waits 43 weeks for baby that never was. Mother and daughter accused in elaborate pregnancy hoax. His phone filled with messages from people he barely remembered. Sympathy mixed with curiosity. Concern tainted by hunger for detail. He stopped answering. At night, he sat in the nursery and tried to understand how something imaginary could leave such a physical ache. He packed away gifts unopened, folded blankets that had never warmed anyone. Each item felt like proof of his own complicity, how deeply he had believed. She was released from the hospital with a referral for psychiatric evaluation. He didn't see her. He wasn't sure he could. Her mother wasn't released so easily. Detectives uncovered prior incidents, patterns of control, financial manipulation, lies told on her daughter's behalf long before this. The pregnancy hadn't been an anomaly. It had been an escalation. She orchestrated it. The detective told him during a follow-up meeting, "Your partner participated, but the direction came from her mother." He nodded, though the information didn't bring relief. It only complicated the grief, because if her mother was the architect, then what was her daughter? A liar? A victim? Both? As charges were prepared, he was asked if he wanted to press for restitution, for damages, for accountability. He said yes, though the word fell hollow. There were no measurements for what he had lost, no dollar amount for anticipation, for love misplaced, for a future mourned prematurely. Only records, statements, and a case file thick with absence. As the legal machinery began to turn, one thing became clear. This wasn't a crime driven by malice alone, but by power, dependence, and a lie so carefully maintained that even the people living inside it forgot where truth was supposed to begin. And soon, the question would no longer be what happened, but who would be held responsible when the story finally faced judgment. By the time the case reached court, the story had been stripped of privacy. What had once been whispered in hospital hallways now played out in headlines and comment sections, dissected by strangers who spoke with certainty about people they had never met. Sympathy fractured quickly, splintering along uncomfortable lines. Some called him naive. Others called him lucky, at least no one died. A few questioned why he hadn't noticed sooner, why he hadn't pushed harder. They asked those questions as if love were a skill, not a vulnerability. The courtroom itself felt smaller than he expected. Too ordinary for something that had consumed so much of his life. He sat on a hard wooden bench, hands clasped, listening as attorneys reshaped his memories into timelines and exhibits. When he testified, his voice stayed steady until it didn't. "I trusted them," he said simply. "I trusted her." The prosecutor asked him to describe the baby shower, the nursery, the 42 weeks of waiting. Each answer pulled him backward through moments he had tried to bury. He spoke about the calendar, the missed ultrasounds, the reassurance that had kept him quiet. When he finished, the silence in the room was heavy with discomfort. Then it was her turn. She walked to the stand slowly, eyes down, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. She admitted everything, every lie, every omission. She described the fear that had driven her, the panic that had trapped her in a story she didn't know how to end. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she said through tears. "I just didn't know how to stop." Her defense leaned into that truth. Mental fragility, coercive control, a lifetime of dependence. They framed her as both participant and casualty, someone shaped by a stronger force. Then her mother took the stand. She sat upright, composed, as if attending a formal dinner rather than a criminal trial. She denied manipulation, denied intent. She spoke of sacrifice, of maternal protection, of a daughter incapable of managing her own emotions. "I did what any mother would do," she said. "I kept her safe." "From what?" the prosecutor asked. She hesitated only briefly. "From abandonment." That word echoed louder than any accusation. As evidence mounted, emails, forged documents, witness testimony, the illusion of benevolence eroded. The control became undeniable. The planning too extensive to dismiss as concern. Still, doubt lingered. Even the judge seemed to wrestle with it. This was not a violent crime. No weapon, no body, just deception layered with dependence. Damage inflicted quietly over time. In closing arguments, the prosecutor said it plainly. This case asks us to reconsider what harm looks like. The jury deliberated for days. He waited, heart pounding, trying to prepare for outcomes that all felt insufficient. Justice, he was learning, rarely aligned with emotional truth. When the verdicts came, they were uneven. Her mother was found guilty on multiple counts: fraud, coercion, falsification of records. The sentence carried weight, though not nearly enough to match the years she had shaped through fear. Her daughter's outcome was more complicated. Guilty, but with leniency, mandatory treatment, probation, a recognition of her role, and her damage. The room buzzed with reaction, some satisfied, some outraged. Online, opinions exploded. She should have known better. She was abused. He should move on. He sat quietly through it all. Because what no one seemed to understand was that verdicts didn't answer the question haunting him most. Not who was guilty, but who was the victim. He had lost something intangible but profound. She had lost her autonomy long before the lie began. And her mother, whatever sentence she faced, had lost control over the narrative she had spent a lifetime crafting. As the court adjourned, he felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Outside, cameras waited. Questions shouted. He walked past them without speaking, realizing that justice had been delivered. But healing remained uncertain. And somewhere beneath the legal conclusions, another truth waited to be faced. That punishment could not undo the damage, and the aftermath would demand choices no courtroom could make for them. The sentence was read in a voice that sounded almost bored. Years for her mother. Conditions for her daughter. Legal language wrapped around consequences that were meant to feel final. People nodded as if balance had been restored, as if something had been corrected simply because numbers were assigned to wrongdoing. He felt nothing. No relief. No vindication. Just a dull, persistent emptiness that followed him out of the courtroom and into the gray afternoon beyond it. Reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. Someone brushed past him and apologized automatically, unaware how fragile everything inside him felt. Justice, he realized, was not designed to heal. It was designed to conclude. The first night after sentencing, he returned to the house alone. The silence pressing immediately, heavier than it had ever been when lies still filled the space. He walked room to room, noticing how little had changed and how much. The nursery door stood open. He hadn't stepped inside since the trial began. Now he stood in the doorway, hands at his sides, staring at the crib, the shelves, the carefully chosen details meant for someone who had never existed. The giraffe still sat in the corner chair, its stitched smile unbearable now. He didn't cry. He simply stood there until the ache dulled into exhaustion. Over the following weeks, life resumed its expectations. Friends checked in less frequently. Work demanded focus. The world moved forward, uninterested in the fact that it is stalled somewhere between belief and betrayal. He received notice of restitution, partial reimbursement for expenses tied to the deception. Checks arrived with official seals and explanations attached. He deposited them without satisfaction. Money could not refund hope. Occasionally, he thought of her. He learned through attorneys that she had entered treatment as required. Therapy, supervision, distance, from her mother, from him, from a version of herself that had survived by lying. He wondered if she slept better now, if guilt still woke her in the night. Once, She sent a letter. It was short, careful. She didn't ask forgiveness. She didn't explain. She simply wrote that she was learning how much of her life had been shaped by fear and how much damage that fear had caused. He read it twice, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. He wasn't ready to decide what it meant. As for her mother, the updates were colder. Appeals filed, complaints lodged, a continued refusal to accept responsibility. Even stripped of control, she clung to belief that she had been right. That, more than the sentence itself, unsettled him, because punishment hadn't changed who she was, and it hadn't erased what she'd done. Some nights, he dreamed of the baby, not as an infant, but as a presence, a weight, a future that hovered just out of reach. He woke with his heart racing, reaching for something that had never been there. In therapy, he struggled to explain the grief. There was no child, the therapist said gently. I know, he replied, but there was love. And love, once given, didn't disappear just because its object proved fictional. Eventually, he began dismantling the nursery, not in one decisive act, but slowly, one item at a time. He donated what he could, stored the rest. Each removal felt like a small betrayal of the man he had been when he believed so completely. Yet beneath the sadness, something else began to surface. Clarity. He stopped replaying conversations, stopped wondering what he could have done differently. He began to understand how manipulation worked. Not as obvious cruelty, but as reassurance weaponized, concern turned into control. The sentence had punished the crime. But the truth, fully seen, fully acknowledged, was what was reshaping him now. One evening, as he sealed the last box from the nursery, he paused. The room looked larger, without the crib, emptier, honest. He turned off the light and closed the door. The future no longer looked like the one he'd imagined. But for the first time since the lie collapsed, it felt like something he might eventually step into without fear. And in that quiet acceptance, fragile and unfinished, the final reckoning was waiting, not in the courtroom, but in what came after the story ended. The house sounded different once the nursery was gone. Not louder, not emptier, just honest. He noticed in the mornings first, the way sunlight reached corners it hadn't before, the way his footsteps no longer echoed with expectation. The door at the end of the hall stayed closed now, no longer a reminder of what might have been, but of what had finally been acknowledged. Time moved strangely after that. Without a countdown, days stopped feeling like something he had to survive. They simply passed. He settled into routines that belonged to him alone. Early runs before work. Cooking meals without planning for someone else's needs. Evenings spent reading or sitting quietly, learning how to be still without waiting for a cry that would never come. Occasionally, memory intruded. A onesie folded in a donation bag. A calendar page he'd forgotten to throw away. The words soon echoing in his mind like a promise that had never been made in good faith. When those moments arrived, he let them pass. He didn't fight the grief anymore. He let it move through him, lighter each time. He heard from her once more months later. Another letter, longer this time. She wrote about therapy, about learning the language of boundaries, about the terrifying freedom of making choices without her mother's permission. She didn't ask to meet. She didn't ask for absolution. I'm learning who I am when I'm not afraid, she wrote. He read the letter slowly, then folded it and placed it beside the first. He felt no urge to respond. Some connections, he understood now, didn't need closure to be complete. As for her mother, news arrived only indirectly. Appeals denied. Silence enforced. Control finally limited by walls she couldn't argue her way through. He didn't feel satisfaction, only distance. And distance, it turned out, was its own kind of peace. One afternoon, he stood in the empty nursery again. The walls were still gray. The room held no objects, no symbols, just space. He imagined repainting it someday. A guest room, an office, something unnamed and undecided. For the first time, the uncertainty didn't frighten him. He thought about the story people would remember, the headlines, the shock, the deception, but he also knew what wouldn't make it into those summaries. The quiet endurance, the love that had been real even if its object wasn't, the way truth had arrived not as a revelation, but as a slow, devastating clarity. In the end, the lie hadn't just collapsed. It had emptied the space it once occupied. And in that space, something else had begun to grow. Not hope, exactly, and not forgiveness. Just a steady, unremarkable continuation of life. As he turned off the light and closed the door behind him, he understood that healing wasn't a moment or a verdict or a sentence served. It was the quiet decision, made over and over again, to live honestly, even when the truth was the hardest thing he'd ever carried.